the last 15 years, people have been asking me, how do you build a successful career? I want to think it's because I wrote a book on this, but I'm beginning to wonder if it's just because I'm old. I know I've got a lot of experience, a lot of water under the bridge. That's what we're going to talk about today on the Lead Everyday Show. Not that I'm old, but we're how to build a successful career. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller, and you are old, but I don't think they asked this question because you're old, because 15 years ago you weren't old. I think people really want some help. They really want some guidance. I've been getting these career questions for probably 30 years, which is even more bizarre. But I'm excited about this episode where we can share some things that may help someone.
Yeah, me too, Mark. I know there are a lot of people out there. We could even go back to the engagement numbers. You and I've referenced those before here, but we're like 70% of people. That's close. Might be 72%, depending on which survey you look at. But Gallup's latest number, 70% of people are miserable at work. They're disengaged. I think some of them are disengaged. You said months ago, it's probably a leadership issue as much as it's an engagement issue. But I think part of it is, it's a leadership issue, but part of it is a self-leadership issue. We've not really learned how to pay attention to who we are, and we end up in these places that we may not should be in, or we stay longer than we should if we get in the wrong role. And so today we're going to talk about how to build a successful career. And I'm with you. I'm pumped about this episode. I think it'll help some people who may be out there thinking, is it time for a change, or do I need, even young people we talk to all the time who are looking at their first job. You know, I was with a group last week. I did a workshop up in Baltimore, and a guy, the CEO of the company, he talked about in their company, he said, we're trying to create careers here, not jobs. And I think even that mindset, but they had done some things to try to align their talent before just giving them a job or making sure, you know, every position is filled. You want to fill the positions with the right people. And I think from our side as the listener today, it's just nothing worse than being in the wrong role. You said it a couple of weeks ago. We don't want to get down the road and feel like we've stole their life, you know. And how many people are going to get to the end of a career where they just, you know, they're just doing a job and feel like they forfeited their life? So that's not what we want. We're going to try to help some people today.
Yeah, and I know you've been thinking about this for a long, long time. In fact, how long you wrote a book on this? How many years ago was that?
I think we the first printing of Finding Your Way was in 2012. I think we reprinted in 2014. The second, I mean, it's been over a decade of trying to help people navigate this. And it's interesting that you bring that up. When I wrote the book with Dan Webster, I remember you saying, and this was in a former life, it felt like at the time, but I remember you saying you're going to be the epilogue to your own book. And it really was true. There was so much of my career that shifted at that point, right after that. And it just is a good reminder that no matter where you are in your career, you've written about this before, the importance of reinventing, continuously. But I think we should feel permission to reinvent ourselves in our work life over and over again if we need to, until we find that right place. And then I think at some point, I learned that it's never going to always be right. You and I are even having a conversation in a week about the future. And I think we're continually realigning our lives with our opportunity. That's the way I would think about it. And so, yeah, when we wrote Finding Your Way, it was a time of angst for me, but I've reinvented 2 or 3 times since then, my role even in my own, sphere here. So it's a big topic.
Yeah. So take us on that journey. Let's see if we can share some of the lessons that you've personally learned and you've written about, and I'll sprinkle in a few thoughts along the way, because as I said, people have been asking me for career advice for longer than they should have. And so I have found some things that seem to resonate, and I'll add those as it feels appropriate.
That sounds great. Okay, so I've got a copy here of actually Finding Your Way. I'll hold it up, and if anybody's not read that, I encourage you to get a copy. Dan Webster, I'll just give a little backstory. Dan Webster called me, I don't know, 2010, 2011, and he says, hey, I got something I need you to help me with. And I'm like, okay, no problem. And he's a friend and lives up in Michigan. And so he had been a friend and mentor for several years. And so Dan says, why don't you get us a boat? I'm going to come down. I'm going to be at a conference in Atlanta. I'm going to speak. And then I've got a day on the back end. Once you get a boat, we'll go fishing and we'll hang out. And I'm like, okay. Well, it turns out, I guess he was vetting me. I don't know what was going on because we didn't talk about the project at all. We caught some fish and had a good time. We get to the end of the day. And I'm like, okay, what about the project? You were wanting to get my help. And he says, why don't you schedule a flight up to Michigan where he lived and come hang out with me for a couple of days in a couple of weeks. And I'll tell you about it there. And I'm like, this is really weird. So, I'm like, okay, so I do that. Well, in the meantime, you'll remember this. You and I were talking. I mean, it's just kind of weird. I was talking because you'd written several books, and I asked you the question. I said, "Tell me about your writing. I think I want to write a book." And you at the time, Mark, remember you had written a few parables, some of your earlier books, the work you did with Ken Blanchard, and then a couple on your own. You'd use that genre, and I'm a storyteller, so I like that. And so I go and I go and meet with Webster, and he says, hey, I want you to help me write a book. That's the first thing he says. And I'm like, okay, tell me about it. And we got this construct, and I'll give people a chance to think through it here in just a second. But he says, what would it look like if we wrote something together? And I said, hey, what would you think about writing a parable? He said, first thing out of his mouth, he goes, we're not doing a parable. And I'm like, okay, no problem. Mark likes parables, and I thought it might be kind of fun. And he's like, we're not doing a parable. So anyway, we meet the entire morning, and we get to lunchtime, and we got nothing. I mean, it's just terrible. And so I said, he asked me after lunch, he says, okay, let's start fresh here. Where do we go from here? And I asked him again, I said, well, what if we did a parable? And he says, okay, talk me through what you're thinking. And so we had this construct that he had laid out. And I said, what if there's a young, guy, in the case of the book, we used a college senior, and he kind of became the guy. And so we walked through this process and ended up with a parable, a fun parable. And we've been able to help a bunch of people. A bunch of colleges have used it with, all their freshmen through the years, and high schools, young leaders, young professionals. It's been a fun book. And so real quick, we started with this concept or this idea of it.
Hold on, I'm going to stop you. Okay. Because I don't want you to undersell what you've got here. You have had a lot of success with younger leaders, but you've had success with older leaders. And I don't want our listeners to go, oh, this is for my son, or this is for my grandson, or this is for the high school kid down the street. Yes. There are leaders all over the world that need what you're about to say. So I got the fact you've gotten traction with younger leaders, but I've shared this with, and you have too, with a lot of fully grown men and women. Yeah. And so I want people to have that in their head as they listen to what you're about to share.
Yeah, that's good. But and there are so many people, and this actually happened to me. You get to this point where you're in the middle of your career, and you may feel at a place where you're literally stuck. We wrote a sequel called Unstuck that the same kind of concept, but how many people do we know that are just misaligned a little bit? And yeah, it's miserable for that person, but man, just think of the effect of all the people around them, the people being led by them, the people that are on teams with them. So this really is important. We talked about it earlier, but this is a big deal that we get this right. And I think when we're lined up, it's so powerful. So our construct was pretty simple. And I know you've got some things to add some color to it based on a conversation you just had with a young leader a few weeks ago. But again, to your point, we have talked to seasoned executives who I had a guy told me just a while back, he had read this book, and he said, I would have done anything to read that as a 20-year-old, as opposed to, when I'm 60. But he said, I've got some things that I learned from it now that I'm making some adjustments for my next season. So that's a good call out. I love that. Okay. So the thing started with this idea. If we're going to really think about our future, think about our career, we said the first thing we need to do is look back. And it sounds pretty simple, but I don't think enough people pay attention to how they're wired up. A lot of times when I am maybe just starting out looking for a job, or maybe I'm not happy in the job I have, and I've been doing this for 22 years, and now I want to change, and I'll just take anything maybe because I'm miserable. And that's not a good reason to make a change. And so we said the first thing we need to do is look back. And when we say look back, we always talked about the idea of who were you before you were 10 years old. Now, this is pretty simple. If you were organized before you were 10, if you were inquisitive before you were 10, if you're a people person, or if you're a task person, I mean, there's clues to who you were that are hardwired. Basically, our point is what's hardwired into you that you can't, you can't wake up today and think, I want to be really organized. If you're a non, detailed person, you can work on it, but there's probably some clues in your past and maybe even in your past jobs along the way. But I think even starting very early, if you still have access to your parents, go back and talk to them, coaches, teachers, anybody that knew you as a kid, there were things that were true about you. And if you were very introverted as a kid, you're probably not really extroverted as an adult. And so again, very simple here, just to start with, who am I? And I like just looking back, and I think those clues from my past are a part of, if I'm going to really try to build a successful career, let me make sure that it is congruent with who I am as a person. Does that make sense? All right. So number two, we said we want to look in, and this one to me might be the most important part. I think there are causes and there are topics, and there are things that will interest one person that another person may or may not be interested in. And we use the example, if we started talking politics right now, there, and we had a group of 10 people, there might be 2 or 3 people that would really lean into that. And then there'd be 5 or 6 people that go, I don't want anything to do with politics. Or if we started talking, art and music, there might be a couple of those people that would really lean into that. Or sports, there might be some people that would be interested, and others would go, there are people that are passionate about all kinds of things. Now, what does that have to do with a job? I think when I look at my job and I go back to, jobs I've had along the way, if I look in, there are places and parts of those jobs, maybe even pieces of the job, not the whole job. Let's say I'm back in the day, I've got a lawn business. Well, did I like mowing yards, or did I like having my own business? I mean, there's things that you can, really pay attention to there, especially if you look back and you have this entrepreneurial bug, and then you find yourself in a situation where you have very little opportunity to innovate and start something. There's probably a place or in your heart where you're just like, it's just not the same, and you're not really sure what it is. But if you've not paid attention to some of these things, we use the example of a grand piano. They say if you open up the back of a grand piano and you yelled into the back of it, which nobody would do this, but you yelled the word "hey" real loud into the back of the piano. What I've heard is that the string that's tuned closest to the resonant frequency of your voice will actually vibrate more than the other strings. It's pretty amazing when you start looking at sound and how some of that works. And I think in the same way for us as leaders, there are things that cause us to vibrate, so to speak. And we give some questions here, Mark, that we think are important. Like, where is the energy? Like, if you have things you're doing that drain energy out of you, and yet you spend a lot of your time doing that, it's no wonder that you might be miserable in what you're doing. And yet there are some things that are life-giving. If you can align to that, that's important. The second question we ask is, where's the effectiveness? I may be energized by something, but if I'm awful at it, my talent's not there. Well, that's a part of this equation as well. And somebody's going to build a really great career. It needs to be something that they're not only excited about, but that they have a competency there. I think we would both agree with that. And then the third one is, where's the encouragement? I mean, there's, if you're doing whatever it is you're doing and nobody's really saying like this is good, that might be another clue there. So again, these first two, to look back and to look in, really important. And I'm constantly telling leaders, if you can really dial this in more, and I use the example there of, you and I are old enough to remember when we were kids, they had the old radio dial. And I mean, like when I say dial, I'm not talking digital dial. I'm talking the old stick, and, and it would just go across the numbers, and people are like, what are you even talking about? You can look this up. But if you had a radio station that was, let's say a lot of it was AM when we were kids, all they had. But if you got pretty close to your, you could be going through a town, and let's just even say that it's, we'll even move into the digital age so people can handle it. And let's say you're going to listen to 99.3, and if you're in a place where it's rural, you can get to 99.1, and it actually, you can get a little static, but you're getting close. Well, I love it, the idea of dialing in HD, my life and my leadership. Like, how close can we get to what we were born to be? And I think if we can do that, we really do set ourselves up to have just a life-giving career. And it breaks my heart to think that there are people who go 40, 50 years in a work world and hate every day. I mean, that should never happen. And so, again, looking back and looking in, what resonates with you, these can be powerful, again, a construct to help us think about what is it that we need to pursue here. And I think we can do that. We can be on our way. So I'll come up for breath there, let you kind of respond to the first two, and then I'll share the other two here in a minute. And you may have some ideas and things that you've told leaders yourself along those lines.
Well, I think certainly would affirm what you're saying, but I've tried really hard to understand, for a lot of men and women, leaders specifically, this decision feels overwhelming. And I've tried to understand why. And of course, the root cause might be different for different leaders. I think there's an intuitive sense that where I'm going to invest my time and energy and passion and skills, like, it matters. And I think the gravity of it can be intimidating to some folks. But I believe, particularly in the world we live in today, that you shouldn't make the types of decisions we're talking about thinking it's the last time you can make that decision. Particularly when I'm talking with men and women under the age of 50. You might even could say that with men and women under the age of 60, but those earlier in career leaders, I say, you're going to change jobs, maybe even change careers, if you believe the data, a dozen times over the course of your life. And so if you approach each one of these opportunities with fear and trepidation, you're going to make yourself miserable. You might even make yourself sick worrying about, and I've had leaders say this to me recently, I don't want to make the wrong decision. I don't want to make a mistake. And so I've said, don't make this decision as if it's a 10, 20, 30, 40-year decision. Make it as if it's your next career move. And I think for some of them, that's been kind of a liberating thought, that they felt like they were going to be stuck once they made some of these job and career related decisions. And so for some people, that's been really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'll play back to you your own words. I remember a few years ago, my wife and I were debating, like, do we want to move? And one of the things I thought you said was really good. You said this, because we had a little bit of, I mean, it's even a little different when we think about where we live versus where we work and how, our job. But you said this doesn't have to be your last house. I like that line here. This doesn't have to be your last job, so to your point.
And it probably won't be.
It probably
won't be.
Exactly. Even more so with the job than the house. So yeah, that was a good reminder.
But I tell you what, I bet if we looked at the statistics, I'll have to go offline and Google this later. I bet people move more than they change jobs.
They may.
I think they probably do.
Yeah.
So just just look at this as your next learning opportunity. And I don't know if you want to talk about this now or not, but I've reflected, I tell people I had trouble holding down a job, even though I was with one company for almost 45 years. I had 7, 8, 9, 10 jobs in that company, and several of them were career changes. And so each time I moved, I just hit reset on, hey, let's figure out how much I can learn. And sometimes that was by choice, and sometimes it was a necessity, because if you change careers, whether you're in one company or not, going outside the same organization, and your learning curve it gets really steep. And so again, I think that frames it as the next part of your career and life adventure. I think there's a little bit of a mindset there. Just don't get stuck and paralyzed with, I don't want to get this wrong. I don't think you can get it wrong if you learn something in that new role. Now, you may not stay there a long time. If you go, no, this is not as life-giving and as energizing and as fulfilling as I thought it would be, great. Learn all you can until you figure out what's next.
Yeah, that's good. That reminds me of something Shane, our ops guy, Shane, shout out to Shane here. He always says what's now always leads to what's later. And it is, I love your spirit of like, well, I'm going to learn here and I'm going to stack that for later and I'll be able to take that with me, or, you know, and it may be all I take with me is I'm not going to do that again, but probably there's something in that role that will be a trigger to or I don't know what even the word is it'll benefit me down the road. I mean, it's just something that you'll learn there. Again, the way you said it, I like that. That's really good. Okay, so let me give the last two ideas here in our construct. It was to look up. We talked about, you know, look back, look in. Well, we want to look up. And what do we mean by look up? And maybe there'll be some people that are listening. They're just like, I'm not really sure about that. But I think all of us, whether we're a person of faith or not, we're not, it's not a faith-based book. But one of the things we talked about is we do believe that we have this responsibility to use our lives in a positive way. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. And I don't think we're here. I know you and I both are big on servant leadership. We don't think we're here just to, you know, suck up all the air in the room and not create opportunities for other people. I think as leaders, even more so, we have the opportunity to help other people win. And so we talked about, you know, in the look up phase, it's this idea that we have responsibility. I do believe we've been created, we've been gifted, we've been, you know, given this place to live and all this kind of stuff. And I use the example, there's an old Bible verse that says that God determined the exact times and places where men should live. Meaning, I believe that if God would have wanted us to all be 12th century Egyptians, we probably would have been 12th century Egyptians. It's no accident that we're here in the world that we're in today, technology world, high speed, all this kind of stuff. Now, I understand the world's broken and it's not perfect. And I'm not saying that, you know, it's not marred. I mean, there's a big problem, obviously, but I don't want to be the person that doesn't appreciate the fact that I get to live here and now, and we'll get to hand that off to somebody else later. And so I think it's important for us to understand that we have responsibility, not just for ourselves, but really for the next generation, for the people on our team, the people in our family, however you want to think about that. But there was this look up element of it that I don't want to just look in and it's all about me. I want to make sure that I understand that there's a look up deal going on here. And I've got responsibility for more than just myself and me being happy in my job. So I think that's a big one. And then the last one, and then we can sort of unpack these two. The last one is to look out. And we talked about what's going to be a sustainable career. And I think a learning career is a sustainable career. But as I start projecting out 5, 10, 20 years from now, am I really going to stay in this job, you know, for the long haul if I'm miserable in this job? And I know a guy who told me years ago, he said, I'm not doing too good here with what, I mean, I kind of hate what I'm doing, but I've got 15 years left and then I'm going to be able to retire. And I'm thinking, I just don't know how you show up to work every day with I've agreed with myself that I'm going to be miserable for only 15 more years. That's just crazy. And I sometimes I'll meet, you know, a teacher who's got 4 years till retirement and they're talking about retirement. You and I know a teacher who's 4 or 5 years past retirement and he's talking about teaching for the next 5, 10 years. And so I just think there's a difference there in that mindset and the misery that we carry with us if we go day after day and it's just this drudgery. I don't think that's what we were created for. And I don't think we're going to, I don't think, or I say probably at the end of the day, we're not going to do our best work if we're miserable in that and just basically inflicting ourselves on everybody in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a little bit of just play the movie forward. And if you don't see your circumstances changing for the better, if you can't have joy and peace and fulfillment in the work, that'd probably be a clue that you need to start looking for something else, at least from my perspective. Now, let me say to that point, I have an old school mindset, and I feel I can justify it because I'm an old guy. But I was talking to a young man recently, and he was trying to figure out where he should work next in the organization. And I said, well, what if you let the organization decide? It's like, well, what's that mean? It's like, well, the organization, the senior leaders, they've got perspective that you don't have. I told him the story. This was a long time ago, maybe 25 years ago. The president of our company called me and he said, hey, there's a job opening in marketing. We need somebody to lead national advertising. And I was in operations. And he said, do you want that job? And I said, well, you've got something I'll never have. And he said, what's that? And I said, perspective. I said, you're the president of this organization, and you can see the whole scope of the enterprise, and you can see further into the future than I can because of my role. I said, I'd like you to do me a favor. And he said, what's that? I said, I want you to project 5 years into the future and imagine me in that marketing role and imagine me staying in operations. And I'd like you to tell me where you think I would add the most value. And I said, that's where I want to work for the next 5 years. And I think he was maybe a bit taken back by that. And he said, I'll call you back. So he hung up. And so about 3 days later, he called. And it was one of my shorter conversations with him over the course of my career. He said, you're staying in operations. And he hung up. And I thought, okay, great. Because I'm on the path that the organization believes I'm going to add the most value. I had a wonderful experience serving at the pleasure of the organization. I did have a lot of roles over the years, but I never asked for any of them, because as you begin to do good work, do it on time, do it on budget, build some sort of personal brand. I'll say a word about that in a minute if we've got time. I think the organization will find places where your strengths and your talents can be leveraged. And I want to be adding value. I want to be meeting needs within the organization. So that's something maybe a little bit weird for folks to consider, not you mapping out your career, but letting your organization deploy you where you can add the most value. You might be surprised at how that would turn out.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the key there, Mark, that you had going is that healthy communication. That does maybe feel like a old school kind of principle, but really at any school, the communication is going to be the oxygen of those relationships. And the fact that you're talking about that, and there is a plan, and there's a mapped out, like, I care about this, and I want, to know that my by the way, that same president told me one time, if you don't like your leader, then you should just fire your boss. And I'm like, what is he talking about? And he basically made the comment, you do get to choose where you work and who you work for. And you can't fire that boss. I mean, he's going to stay. You're going to actually just choose to go work with somebody that you can work with. And I love your heart of, if I'm going to work here, and I've heard you say this over and over through the years, I serve at the pleasure of the organization. I'm going to trust, if I'm going to be a part of this brand, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be leaned in, and I'm going to do my very best to make this the best brand it can be.
Yeah.
Okay. So you may want to say more.
But let me say something about that. I think you need to, let's assume you're going to change organizations. And I'm not against that. Again, I did not have that experience. I stayed in one place a long time, but I know a lot of very successful people who add tremendous value to their organizations and the world, and they've worked for 6 different companies. So that may be your path. But my encouragement to you is to choose your company carefully. Like, what are their values? What are their beliefs? What is their worldview? There are organizations, and it'd be a fascinating conversation if we could sit down for a cup of coffee. I bet we'd come up with some of the same names. Yeah. There are organizations whose reputation is to grind people up and spit them out. Yeah. Well, unless you want to learn something specific about what it feels like to be ground up and spit out, don't go there.
Yeah.
Right. Don't subject yourself to that.
That's
So
good.
I would say choose your organization carefully. Here's
Right.
something
Let me
that
throw
I
you.
want to say that you may not have thought about in a while. Top talent always has options. You've always got choices. And so don't choose prematurely, don't choose quickly, don't choose out of a sense of urgency. Is choose your organization carefully.
Well, I do think sometimes we choose an organization maybe early on, especially because of money, and then we feel trapped. And I mean, I all this stuff is a part of this conversation, and we can't unpack that. Let me throw you a little curveball here. So when you think about your company, and you had the opportunity to move around, let's say 7 or 8 times. I don't. It might have been more than that. You said you had a hard time holding down a job. You led a lot of stuff. It was great. Do you think, Mark, that there was like have you ever really thought about like how important it was to have those 8 or 10 different roles from an energy standpoint? I mean, where are you? I know for me, I was in some organizations for a longer period of time, and I switched roles 3 or 4 times. Do you think there's something in us that needs that fresh challenge, that fresh perspective, that to be stretched even? I mean, I know you've kind of approached it that way. Can you talk a little bit about the value of that? Even
Well,
again, we could switch companies and have that same thing happen. We're
sure.
not saying switch companies. It can't happen in the company that you're in. How important do you think that was for you?
Well, I think it was important for me, but it may be less important for another leader. So I don't want to paint with a paint roller here. Um, Different people need different levels of challenge. They need different types of stimulation. Different people need more variety. But in my case, I think it was the way I approached the work that led to the variety, because I was going in, even from the very beginning, throughout my career, I was in jobs that I was not qualified for. But my approach was always, what can I learn? How can I add more value? Well, once you move up a learning curve and you add value, then the organization said, let's put him over here because, oh, by the way, performance improved. And we know he's not qualified, but we've also seen he's probably going to approach it as a learner, and he's going to see how much value he can add, and he's going to focus on building results and relationships. And let's go over here, and let's go over here, and let's go over here. So I don't think the variety was necessarily because the organization was trying to satisfy me, because back in the day, there weren't a lot of people moving. The accounting people stayed in accounting and the marketing people stayed in marketing. I was in a bit of an outlier in those early days in our organization. But I think it was the approach and the fact that I mentioned personal brand earlier, and it'd be a fun conversation to ask people what my brand was back in the day. But I think it was, he'll be a learner, he'll add value, and performance will improve. And he'll fix stuff that's broken when he goes into a role. And so the organization then saw other places for me to do that. And so they weren't moving other people around because they needed variety. I think they were moving me around because I built a brand as a guy who would attack the hard problems and help people win. And so this recent conversation, somebody says, what kind of personal, I want to paraphrase, but they were saying, how important is my personal brand and how much thought should I give and what should my brand be? And I said, how about great work, on time, on budget?
Yeah.
It's like, that'd be a pretty good brand.
Yeah.
And you can use that brand anywhere you go.
Well, and you said learner too. I like a person who's teachable and who's has the humility to learn from others. I just think that's a powerful part of that as well. But what a great little list that would be, to just bring yourself to work every day and try to add the most value and learn all you can and be helpful. I mean, that's just like, we don't hear enough of that these days, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So you got a last thought here?
Here's my last thought. Again, I know it's old school, and so if this doesn't work for you, give me a little grace here, and I still love you and you can still love me. But I have been challenging young people, not even young people, mid-career people, for decades. My bottom line advice, if you want to build a great career, is focus on contribution. It's not that career is irrelevant. It's not that career is unimportant. We all want to have a fulfilling, satisfying, soul enriching career. I got that. But I think the quickest path to a great career is to figure out how to maximize your contribution to the organization.
So good. So good. Said another way, you told me years ago that you gave the counsel through the years to people, and we've had this, probably young people specifically would fall into this bucket, but how do you advance your career? And you said, make your boss wildly successful. And it's amazing. I think the NFL season, just started a week or so ago. It's amazing how many of those coaches that are coaching today came out of, Andy Reid's tree or Sean McVay's tree. It's like they were successful when they served on their staffs, and now they had their opportunity. And so I just think there's something in that last thing you said there. Just go be a contributor. And it's amazing what happens. And by the way, I think it does cause us to feel more engaged when we know we're doing great work. Even maybe for a season, we're not completely in our spot, but we're preparing, again, Shane's right. We're what's now really is preparing us a lot of times for what's later. As I look back on my career as a coach and a teacher and a speaker and a leader, it's like a lot of that stuff is just in a bigger package now, doing the things that we're doing as a business owner and all the stuff that's going on. So it's again, I think all of it is a preparation, stepping,
Yeah. But let me add one little twist on that. Experience is not the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher, because you can go through all types of life experiences and actually not learn anything.
Not learning.
Unless you're trying to learn something. And so I love the fact that you and I both have had a lot of roles and different responsibilities. But what I like even more is that we've tried to use each and every one of those as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So if you want to learn more about what we've talked about today, Finding Your Way might be a book that you want to pick up. You can get that at leadeveryday.com or get it on Amazon, wherever you get your books. I love the book. The parable's fun, but the thing I think I like the most about it is the last, 50 pages or so. There's actually what we call a journal or a blueprint, basically, to help you kind of think through what your potential next step might be. And so if that'd be helpful to you, pick up a copy of Finding Your Way. And then join us next week as we continue to try to add value. Mark, we'll try to contribute to the listeners if they'll keep showing up, keep sharing with your friends and family, people you work with. We love that, and we love all you guys who listen. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.